addiction, prevention, recovery.
Welcome to the Recovery Rebirth podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Recovery Rebirth podcast. I'm Dominic.
And I'm Jillian.
And welcome to part 2 of social media and fantasy addiction. We'll probably focus a little more on fantasy addiction, but it starts with social media addiction.
Yes.
And if not starting with it, it certainly continues the process. So we talked about, being addicted to our phones, being addicted to different pieces of social media, whether it's Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Snapchat, TikTok. Oh, by the way, TikTok is just a time suck,
I've heard.
I didn't talk about this in the last episode,
yeah.
but somebody, for business, somebody got me to install TikTok because we were posting some business-related videos. Mm-hmm. Well, me being the good addictive personality that I am, I got to go check out this platform and investigate it. And I swear to God, I've never spent so much time doing absolutely nothing, looking at garbage.
Yeah.
It's amazing what's all over. And just like anything, it's like cable. There's, or satellite dish. There's 10,000 channels of nothing.
Exactly. Yep. Being self-aware and knowing my ADHD brain, I have absolutely refused to download TikTok, especially when I was taking classes, because I'm like, I'll get sucked right in, and 3 hours later.
Yep, 3 hours later.
I'll just think of all the things that I could have done. And
say, what did I just watch? And I can't believe people do that stupid stuff. But I guess it's popular.
It is.
So, but social media creates a lot of fantasy illusions, So speaking about fantasy addiction, because you can get addicted to an artificial world, which social media perpetuates. But Jillian, do you have some insight into, where did this term fantasy addiction come from, and what was it originally related to? Because it's certainly expanded now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I do have some personal experience with that, and I think. So in recovery, I have some experience with that and awareness through one of the fellowships I participate in, Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous, SLAA, or SLA sometimes. But I was pondering, where this starts in our lives. So when I was a young girl, and I think for... I'm sure, young boys, gender aside, but I think young girls tend to watch Disney movies more, princess kind of stuff, right? Mm-hmm. So at a very young age, a lot of us are exposed to these fairy tale ideas of what romantic relationships are supposed to look like. Our Prince Charming comes to rescue us and we live happily ever after, blah, blah, blah. Then, as adults, there's so many romantic comedies that also have unrealistic kind of portrayals of what relationships actually are, because that's that honeymoon phase is only meant to last for a little while. And I think some people, maybe myself included, sometimes compulsively seek that falling in love stage and the fantasy and the excitement of that phase of it, but you're not meant to stay there. And then if we're using these movies, whether when we're little girls or young people and when we're older, and seeing all these depictions that are unrealistic, it sets us up for disappointment, frustration, resentment, when we try to apply that to our own lives.
You mean happily ever after doesn't exist?
Yeah, I mean,
well, I guess it can, but
it
I know some people are married for 50 years. They celebrate their 50th wedding anniversary or longer, or whatever, and it's like, wow. Today the divorce rate in America is 50, 60%?
At least 50, yeah. Well, what you don't see is Cinderella and Prince Charming,
having an argument.
Her going through menopause and his bursitis acting up, or
somebody gets fired from their job.
Somebody files for bankruptcy, or just they're fighting over the kids' sports schedules or who's going to clean the house, or we don't see these things,
right?
And that's a real part of relationships. So you can have a happily ever after, but I mean you have to. It's not going to be serene and romantic all the time. That's just unrealistic. But we're kind of set up for that.
People don't go to the bathroom in the movies.
Yeah, they don't.
Especially in romantic comedies. You don't see, oh, I got to go to the toilet here. I just had Taco Bell.
Nobody farts in bed. Like, you don't see that in Disney movies.
Right.
So, but for this other fellowship I mentioned, there's a lot of focus, and I actually have a sponsor who pointed out to me that I'm aware that I have like codependency, love addiction stuff, and so for everybody who's a love addict, they have kind of the codependent roots, but not every codependent is a love addict. So if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's also this fantasy addiction piece that I was hearing about. So I wanted to share. So in SLA, we also have, the 12 steps, which they're pretty much the same throughout all the fellowships. With the first step, the wording changes a little bit depending on the addiction. But they also have characteristics of sex and love addiction. And there are two that I wanted to mention that are germane to this topic. So the fourth one is we confuse love with neediness, physical and sexual attraction, pity, and or the need to rescue or be rescued. And then the 12th characteristic is we assign magical qualities to others. We idealize and pursue them, then blame them for not fulfilling our fantasies and expectations. So that last one especially really gets at the fantasy addiction. There are a couple things I found online on the SLA site that I just wanted to share with listeners. I almost said readers.
Well, you can read the show notes.
You can. It's a lot more fun to listen, though. So these are characteristics of fantasy addiction. It's sort of like an article. So one, we confuse fantasy with authentic hope in living. We attach our needs for love, healing, intimacy, and growth to people or scenarios about which we compulsively fantasize. Two, we experience emotional instability in relation to the misalignment between reality and our fantasies. Three, we allow our fantasies to become the higher power of our lives. We set our compulsive fantasies up on a pedestal and focus on them, losing sight of reality as a way to control our pain, fear, and low self-esteem. Four, in fantasy, we lose precious time, interest, and energy in our lives as they are consumed into the vacuum of our addict's making. Five, our lives become unmanageable and stagnant as we are immobilized by our fantasies, risking serious consequences. Six, who we are, our development, and our aspirations are held hostage by fantasies of our supplier addicts.
Wow.
So, yeah, a lot of these, some of this stuff. Here's another one. We experience deep pain and debilitating disappointment when our fantasies are not met, especially when we have to face the realities we live in. We become angry and feel rejected when the objects of our fantasies don't live up to our expectations, and we realize they have their own lives and may not reciprocate our obsession for them. They're due to our intense longing for deep connection, we live within our fantasies, oblivious to their true nature and distraction, robbing us of all the blessings of life, shackling us to a life of addiction. So
it's starting to get a little depressing.
It is. Yeah.
It could be pretty ugly. I can admit that I probably have been, as a man, have been guilty of this.
Mm-hmm.
Where, like you said, Jillian, where were we taught as young people growing up when we're little peanuts of kids, tiny little nuggets of children? And sorry, that sounded like a candy shop or something. Nuggets of children. But seriously, when we're that young, and in single digits, and we're watching movies and all of this, we have this vision that is set in our minds. That's like we said when we were talking about social media addiction and the marketing piece.
Yeah,
we are marketed to on what we're supposed to idealize in relationships, in possessions, in home ownership. We're marketed to all of this. So selling the perfect relationship to someone who is prone to addiction, such as fantasy addiction, just kicks that dopamine level, that receptor in, and all of a sudden you meet somebody that perhaps you are emotionally, physically, sexually attracted to, and now you get sucked in. It literally gets sucked in, just like you do in a casino, to pulling the slot machine lever, to getting that fulfilled.
Yeah.
So it can be kind of scary because you go into what's supposed to be happy can take you to a dark place, can it?
Oh my gosh, yeah. Well, and when you have that template in your mind of like, this is what it's going to look like, and then when there's that dissonance of like, oh, this is not what it is. One more quick little snippet, and then I'll just kind of share some of my experience.
Please. Please.
Many of us come to Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous because of some form of obsession. Romantic obsession is broadly defined as an unhealthy fixation on another person with whom we may or may not have a relationship or have even met. A romantic obsession can be triggered by sexual obsession, the beginning or ending of a relationship, or for reasons beyond our present understanding. Yeah.
So I've been dating Drew Barrymore in my head for years. I think she is just the cutest. And if she's listening, Drew, I'd like to go to dinner with you. But I'm in recovery now, so I don't want to make it a big fantasy thing. I just want to enjoy your company for dinner.
Right. That's okay. I've concurrently been married to Simon Le Bon and John Taylor from Duran Duran since I was like a teenager. And I have so many, like, it's funny, I'm thinking about it, but when I'm watching a show with my son, any series we watch, inevitably I usually have like a new boyfriend, right? Like I say it jokingly, but like I have a new I mean, it's not like some people really have like unhealthy celebrity crushes.
So who are you dating when you watched Friends?
I never watched Friends.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I was just curious
Friends.
if you watched it. It was a super popular show, and everybody had the person they would date.
That was during my no TV era, but I did just watch a new show last night when I was having some insomnia, and now my new boyfriend is the head of some hospital. He's a medical director for some some hospital drama I started watching, but I'm just like, oh geez. But some people really, the line between reality and fantasy gets so blurred. Like I'm fully aware, like I'm never going to meet this person, but they're nice eye candy.
I still have hope I'm going to meet Drew.
I'm rooting for you, brother.
But really, we're joking about this a little bit because we try to keep things light.
Yes.
We don't want to just be doom and gloom on the podcast.
Yeah.
But the truth is we're set up for that sort of thing, like the posters you put up as a kid in your room.
Yes.
You know, when I was growing up, everybody had the Farrah Fawcett poster, and that was the depiction, or Bo Derek, or one of those.
I remember those.
And those were supposed to be the perfect. I mean, Bo Derek, the whole movie was a 10.
Yeah, I remember.
So there is the perfect woman, and now we've defined what the perfect woman is for every single man on the planet because of this movie. And there's an example. And, of course, it was just a movie, but those who are prone to problems might get sucked into that that vortex of maladaptive daydreaming.
Yes. And then you get people who, like celebrity stalkers, right? Like people where that get the extreme version of fantasy addiction where they become so obsessed that they take extreme measures and, like, try to harm others, like celebrities, or it doesn't
the
have
Ronald
to be.
Reagan assassination attempt. What was his name? I just went blank.
Geez, so did I.
But he said he did it for Jodie Foster.
Oh, that's right. So bizarre. So bizarre.
Doing something so horrible, getting themselves in a whirlwind of trouble. That's putting it politely.
Yeah.
And doing it for a celebrity, which is twisted.
Doesn't even know that. Yeah, it's so I mean, while I've had plenty of celebrity crushes over, I mean, Robert Downey Jr., Ryan Gosling, Rob Lowe. There's lots of pretty boys over the years that I've, I'm like, oh, they're cute, but I'm not ever gonna stalk them or have any delusions that there's really anything going on other than they're nice to look at. But in my personal life, in my dating life, I have been prone to that rescuing, fixing role, and not realizing on a conscious level at the time, but, until I got into recovery, that I thought, like, if I just loved him hard enough, like I'd love him into sobriety or not being a narcissist or not being mentally ill or not being a cheater, or that's a fantasy. And my sponsor, when she pointed that out, I was like, oh, crap, I have fantasy addiction? I was like, oof, I didn't realize. Because there will be times like, I mean, you're aware of a recent message I got from somebody who, like, I haven't heard from for 18 months, right? And that needed to end. And because I'm so freaking codependent, for 18 months of the 2 years we hung out, I'm like, I got to cut this guy loose. This is so one-sided. I'm frustrated. I'm being his free therapist, I'm enabling it. Like, I didn't blame him, but I'm like, I gotta get out of this. But oh boy, codependents are really bad at cutting people loose. And but I would, periodically like, oh, what if he sends me a letter telling me, making an amends or whatever. Like, that's a form of fantasy addiction too. Like, in my mind, like holding out for their, having this illusion that they're just going to suddenly just be like, I'm so sorry, and just pour their heart out to me. I never got that letter. But I did get a random email a couple weeks ago from him where there was just like kind of a checking in, but thanks to recovery, I didn't get hooked. Because I was kind of through the SLAA program and a great sponsor. I realized I was kind of in the mode of relapse. Like, I don't really even like this person. We're totally not compatible. There are aspects of this that I enjoyed. Like, he was a great cuddler, etc. But I'm like, this is not healthy. Like, this is not helping me or him. And, thank God my higher power moved him off my path. And that was kind of like, I think the universe tests us sometimes. So that was like my test. And I have refrained from responding because even though I'm well into my recovery, I don't want to get hooked again or like get tangled in his web or fall into that fantasy of, I'm going to be his savior or something, right? Like, sometimes we codependents and love addicts, and it said in one of those, one of the characteristics I think I read, we either make others our higher power or we become their higher power, and neither of those is true or healthy. But
well, even in regular alcoholism, drug addiction, whatever recovery, they talk about, if you make a person your higher power, you're in trouble.
Yes.
Whether it be your sponsor or a significant other. And unfortunately, there are a lot of treatment center romances.
Oh,
because now you're separated from alcohol or drugs, but now you've got another dopamine hit because, somebody's cued across the table.
Yeah.
And there's they call it 13th stepping in the recovery arena, whereas you will hit on a newcomer or somebody who might be a little more stable hitting on a newcomer, or two newcomers really hitting on each other.
They just hook up
because you've taken away the drug of choice, and now you're going to another addiction and another one, and then there's just like people get addicted to shopping.
Yeah.
The fantasy of shopping. If I just have more stuff, I'll feel better.
Yeah. Well, in the newcomers, like I think early on I might have had some people try to 13th step me, but thankfully I wasn't interested in any of them. But I can see how, you're in a really vulnerable space.
Right.
And you're connecting with somebody who can who understands that experience, and then there's this attraction. This is why I specifically, for my SLAA program, I only attend women-only meetings, because those are safe for me. Like, there's a lot of good-looking people in this world, but I'm pretty much safe because of, I date men. So I'm safe in their virtual anyhow. But the minute there's some cute guy with the cluster B personality disorder or addiction wanders into one of my meetings, I'm going to completely lose sight of that meeting and be probably, thinking about, maybe I should send him a message in the chat and ask for his number. I don't think I'd really do that, but
I can fix him.
I can fix them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
if he'd just spend a little time with me, I could fix that. Oh.
I'm a great therapist. Just ask the last guy I hung out with. He told me all the time.
It's like the Property Brothers looking at a rundown shack and saying, we can make that into a palace.
Yeah, its potential is great when you're looking to remodel a home, but you can't remodel a man.
Or a woman.
Yeah, exactly. For me,
I date women. I date women.
Can't remodel people.
And I've thought, if I could just help you, I could just lift you up, and I do try to, make sure that the newcomers, whoever they are, that they understand they need to work on their own recovery.
Yes.
Because we've all fallen into it where we get connected with a newcomer. I mean, it's just inevitable. If you've been in recovery for a while, it'll happen at some point when you least expect it. But what you want to keep in mind, everyone should be keeping this in mind, is that your recovery comes first.
Yes.
And you can't fix anybody else. I have enough trouble fixing me, let alone fixing anyone else. So recovery must absolutely be the primary purpose. And if you happen to get a relationship out of recovery and being in recovery, that's wonderful. I don't think I could date anybody that drinks right now. I mean, just mentioned that to somebody the other day. I probably am going to find somebody at some point who's in recovery or doesn't drink. Because I don't want to be around the smell of it, honestly. Yeah. Kissing somebody who's got, whiskey on their breath is just not attractive to me anymore.
Right.
But getting back to the topic is that are we really looking at the person themselves,
No.
or are we looking at the concept of the person? Going back to what you said with the movies and the princess and
the construct,
the construct and the concept of the perfect relationship.
Yeah.
And you're not really looking at the person.
No.
In the honeymoon phase of a relationship, you don't notice people's flaws, do you?
It's designed that way because we've got too much oxytocin, dopamine, all those things like, of course, serotonin. I think those are kind of the big ones. And yeah, it does. It kind of makes us oblivious to
And then
those
you're like
things.
10 years in and you're like, I don't like the way you chew your food.
Exactly.
How come you chew your food like that?
Yeah, why do you
never noticed it.
Your
It used to
smelly
be
socks.
cute in the beginning.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, oh, I just love the way you slurp a straw. It's just like, and then all of a sudden,
I'm going to stab you in the neck with a fork.
right, exactly. Of course, the reality sets in.
Yeah.
But fantasy addicts don't see the reality; they just live in the fantasy, and that's where it becomes one of those maladaptive.
Right. And then
daydreaming.
and when the reality clashes with the fantasy, that's where everything crumbles for them and they become resentful and they become, and like for me, from personal experience, like I become a victim, right? Because these, why didn't they appreciate how devoted and loyal and blah, blah, blah I was? I can't believe they cheated on me. I can't believe they did whatever thing that had nothing to do with me that preexisted that they hadn't healed. And I'm trying to date an unhealed person. Important. We talked about that in a previous podcast in our relationship series. But yeah, and so I would take all this crap personally, and then I would, somehow feel deficient or like something was wrong with me, and and we've all got our quirks, but truly it wasn't because of any shortcoming on my part. Sometimes even in healthy relationships, sometimes people are just incompatible. But in these these pairings, it was often because I was drawn to something about them. That was, not to be so textbook, but every single major relationship has mimicked the characteristics of my relationship with my mom. So here I am, like, still in a sense, like trying to fix my mom, but like not on a conscious level for so long. But dating people because of their potential, or because we think we can fix or rescue, or if they would just do that. I mean, that's never going to result in anything but frustration, resentment, heartbreak. And it's not kind. It's really not loving to the other person either. Because would I want to know somebody who's dating me just because they thought they could improve who I am? Like, true love is loving and accepting someone as they are, all the flaws, warts and all, right? Like, these things frustrate me about you, but I still love and accept you as you are. I'm not going to try to change you. I'm not going to try to fix you.
So you just hit on a topic. A lot of our topics are interrelated.
Yes.
And we did an episode on trauma.
Mm-hmm.
I think we did a series.
We did.
So you might want to go back if you're listening to this and listen to the trauma series.
I'll link those.
And take a look at that, and also the relationship series. I forgot which one we were on. We did a 3-part series on relationships. So
both.
Maybe we can track back to which one is more relevant, or all of them. But trauma and a trauma response, because you mentioned the relationship you had with your mother and this feeling of abandonment.
Yes.
And being able to try to fix her and all of those things. Living a fantasy is oftentimes a trauma response. Looking at the positive change that you would like in the future and fantasizing about that based on the information that we were fed through movies and media and social media and all of that, leads us to this, okay, this is going to be the perfect relationship and I can fix them because I couldn't fix this other one. So you have like unhealthy relationships, strained relationships. You have toxicity because it doesn't work. It's maladaptive. I'm using your favorite word, maladaptive.
It's maladaptive. It is. It is.
But it does relate to trauma. And then when things don't go right, it can cause us to relive our traumas.
Yes.
I actually remember a relationship that I had years ago that I had fallen in love with this woman, and I really wanted to marry her. I wanted to make a family and have the whole life. And we did get along well, so it wasn't all fantasy.
Yeah.
It wasn't a total invention. We really cared for each other. But I think perhaps I dug in more deeply to falling in love more quickly because of the trauma that I suffered losing my parents. And then when we broke up, because I was probably pushing too hard in the relationship and should have just relaxed and let it flow, but I was so devastated because the phrase I used is everything that I love leaves me. Yeah. So that's what that's what I was feeling, is everything I love leaves me, and now you're doing it too. And it's just like the fulfillment of prophecy fulfillment, in fantasy addiction. Now, the concept of us being together and all that was a nice thought, but I kind of probably messed up that relationship because I was much younger then, and it was the mom and dad thing was pretty fresh, still very raw. So there you go. I mean, there's a prime example where you can take a healthy relationship and ruin it because of past trauma, and start crossing over into fantasy. And then you're pushing more for the fantasy than the reality.
Yeah. There is, when you were sharing it, it made me think of, I have a couple of things I wrote down. But yeah, that was a deep wound for you, losing your parents, right? Just like my perceived abandonment from my mother.
For your mother, yeah.
Was a deep wound. And so I just wrote down, allowing our wounds to pick our partners.
Ooh, that's a good one.
So this is something...
Don't allow your wounds to pick your partners would be the positive reinforcement thing.
Exactly. And two terms that I learned through SLA recovery that really helped me to understand my patterns, right? Because I am the common denominator in all of my relationships. Speaking to that trauma piece is repetition compulsion and euphoric recall. So the repetition compulsion is where it's almost like I'm on autopilot when I'm selecting the new person. It's because the faces change, but the core dynamics tend to stay pretty similar.
I've said that to my female friends who I've had, because I have a number of female friends, and they confide in me and talk to me about relationships. And I've said, Jillian, you're dating the same guy. He just has a different name every time.
Yep.
And I could tell you my type has probably changed a bit over the years, but I mean I still have a type that I like, but I've gotten a little more flexible. But I've seen women get into, I don't know if it's a female thing, that they get into this pattern where they'll date the same guy with a different name constantly and wonder why it all turns to crap at the end.
Yeah.
And
because they still have some healing to do.
Right.
In my opinion, they've got some, until you really address those core wounds, for me specifically, until I address those, and I have been actively working on that, and I've been intentionally abstaining from dating after that 2-year situationship with that person who Situationship.
We got to come out with a line of T-shirts or something, posters and T-shirts. We're going to have a promotional product line with some of these phrases. Situationship is. I could see that on a T-shirt.
It might be on T-shirts already, but it was because it was kind of that nebulous, like, well, he's not my boyfriend. I wouldn't want him to be my boyfriend, but he was a teacher, right? Thanks to recovery, I'm pretty recovered from the victim mentality I had for so many years and blaming my romantic partners for all my pain and misery after I blamed my mom. And now I'm just like, he was another teacher. So he helped to illuminate things I need to look at, because that's a way, it's a much healthier and it's much more peaceful way of looking at it. Like, yeah, there were some bumps along the way, but truly it just helped to show me what I still needed to work on. He's not a bad person. He wasn't a good fit for me, and vice versa. But, I did learn through it. It was less painful than the 10-year relationship I had prior. But yeah, so that situationship taught me some things. So because of that, I'm like, okay, I'm giving myself a timeout from dating, because now that I'm learning more about, like, I've kind of identified the source of my patterns. I'm like, okay, so how do I not repeat this?
Right. Now, living in the solution, having an active imagination and, daydreaming a bit and being a visionary, if you will, is not a bad thing. Mm-hmm. Just like people who can go out and have a glass of wine with dinner. Right. That's, alcohol is not the bad thing. It's the addictive piece that kicks in with genetics, and we won't go into that whole description of addiction again, but just having an active imagination and dreaming is a good thing. Mm-hmm. It's when it crosses over into a compulsion.
Yeah, and the romantic fantasy.
So how does a person heal? Because we want to get to the solution part. How does a person heal and actually have a healthy relationship?
Yep. Well, I would say, for me personally, that what I've been doing is taking that intentional break, looking at my patterns.
Patterns, yes.
Looking at my patterns, and this, this fellowship that we've talked about, SLA, has been really helpful for me. It was like my next level, because I started in Al-Anon, as you know, and which was a great foundation, because again, every love addict struggles with codependency. Not every codependent blossoms. I like that word. Blossoms into a love addict.
It makes it sound so much fun.
So much better than
blossoming.
Blossoms versus mutates. No.
Right. Which is really mutate would be more accurate.
It would. But yeah, so I, in those meetings, I've heard women who have, because again, I attend women-only meetings, women or people who identify as women, they have shared how they recovered from, drugs, alcohol, the things, and I've heard so many times, like, this is the PhD of recovery. This is the hardest thing to recover from. I'm like, well, frick, why did I have to pick that? But unlike alcohol,
I don't think you chose your addiction.
Yeah, I didn't.
Let's see. I'll take alcoholism for
spin
500,
the wheel.
Alex.
Right. Yeah, I'll take love addiction for 5,000, please.
Yeah.
I didn't choose it for sure. But I'm like, man, why do I have to have this one? But the good thing is there's a solution. There's a community of recovery for, people that can support me through that. And that's really what has helped me, because I am determined not to repeat that again. After probably no embellishment, I think 3 decades of functioning as a codependent / love addict / fantasy addict, where again, every one of my major relationships was somebody who had some pretty obvious dysfunction or something that was, cheating, addiction, mental health issues, like serious mental health issues, and just focusing on their stuff, because then was an escape from dealing with my stuff. But I'm like, I don't want to do that again. Like, I don't want to fix or unintentionally fix or try to rescue or be somebody's free therapist. Like, I want somebody who's relatively healthy. Like, I don't think I'll ever arrive in this journey, right? But I'm always going to be working toward being a healthier person. And it's weird. Like, I was texting a friend who has, similar childhood dynamics and has struggled with some of the same relational patterns. I'm like, I'm afraid I'll never feel the excitement of dating a really messed up guy again. Like, I'm just being honest. I'm like, man, what if it's just because in my mind, right? Because I was used to so much chaos as a child with my mom's behavior and that relationship dynamic, that like healthy seemed boring, right? And just trying to normalize healthy.
It reminds me of the guy that goes to an AA meeting and the woman comes in and sits down and says, I just got out of jail. And they ask her, what did you get out of jail for? She said, killing my husband. And the guy says, so you're single?
Oh, my gosh. Yeah.
So you hit the nail on the head as spotting patterns. Mm-hmm. That really is what recovery has taught me, is to spot patterns. Mm-hmm. And when we spot patterns, so if you don't journal, some people might call it writing inventory, and journaling, or a combination of the two, is to take a look at the patterns that are not serving you well or others, and what are patterns that are going from normal into compulsion, and not doing that anymore, to turn that over to whatever the universe, a higher power or whatever, to allow that defect to be removed, so that you don't have the same thing happening over and over again and expecting it to be different.
Right. And I do think, at least for me, we'll see. I'm still in process, right? I haven't tried really dating since then. I have some wonderful guy friends who, they're platonic, but they treat me better than almost everyone I've dated, to be honest. And I remember this last guy saying, he's like, you deserve better. You deserve someone that treats you like a queen. I'm like, okay. And so it turns out, like, I have that now. I'm still kind of scared to take it to the next level and date. So I'm just hanging out in this normalizing healthy relationships with men who, treat me with respect, reciprocity, where they value me not just because I'm a pretty face or, whatever superficial thing that I think other guys have been drawn to. But I really think, as I heal and as others heal that part of themselves and those patterns, the addiction to fantasy will dissipate because reality becomes something that's so beautiful and rewarding, like that we don't feel the need to escape through fantasy.
Exactly. You mentioned something that kind of triggered a thought in my mind, and that was, having male friends. I have a number of female friends who I'm close to, and they teach me so much, and I'm grateful for the fact that I can be part of the conversation as a guy. Because oftentimes there's this secretive thing, like dudes talk to dudes about stuff and women talk to women about stuff, and we never find out the secret sauce or whatever.
Right.
But I have female friends who talk about their relationships, and I learn so much about, what guys are doing, these days to them or whatever, or how they're treating them. And in some cases, I'm like, why do you put up with some of that stuff, or don't you think it could be different? And
probably because they're trauma bonded. Sorry, I'm projecting.
It could be, but we're running a little short on time here. We want to keep to our usual schedule.
Yeah.
But please feel free to send us a note, send us an email. The Recovery Rebirth podcast is located on the Vivacity Ventures website, and you can reach out to Vivacity Ventures, and it'll get to us. Do you have any closing thoughts or that you'd like to share with the audience before we go?
Not really. I just want to thank you for suggesting this topic. I think it's been a really great conversation, and I hope that it's been helpful for the listeners. And I look forward to sharing the resources, because, again, we're always trying to focus on the solutions.
And remember that social media can only exacerbate this situation. If you've got fantasy addiction issues, social media is going to reinforce it and make it worse. So be aware of that, so that when you're scrolling through your news feed or looking at pictures or whatever, you're not falling into that trap. That would be my closing thought, is that, the social media addiction and fantasy addiction go hand in hand, because that phone that we carry around, that mini computer, or if you're using a laptop or desktop or whatever, that imagery that you're seeing and the words you're reading can only make it worse in some cases, unless you're aware.
Yes.
To break those patterns. So we can live healthy and productive and happy lives. Happy, joyous,
and free.
Happy, joyous, and free.
Yes.
Tune in next time for the Recovery Rebirth podcast. Thank you, Jillian.
Thank you, Dom, and thank you, listeners.